Welcome. This is the first of a set of videos on the history of the Jewish people. We're going to focus in this very first one on the impact of Thessalonians on the events in Judea from 50 to 100 Christian era. That's also known as AD. This presentation is done by Susan Hares. First of all, this is part of a full history presentation, but I've decided to provide for this course a focus on Thessalonians since we're studying Thessalonians. The full history from 500 BCE to 100 CE of the Jewish people will be available in a 10-part series by July 13th for this course. Now, we take this history from several historians. One is Philo of Alexandria. He was known as a philosopher, but he also has a history that's an apology to Gaius Caligula, also known as the emperor for the little boots for the Roman Empire. Then we have Titus Flavius Josephus, who was a Jew who converted over to the Roman side, Suetonius, a Roman history, Tacitus, a Roman history, Dio-Cassius, a Greek who wrote in history, and Eusebius. On here you will notice their writing, they lived between 25 BCE and 339 CE. We take Philo and Titus and Suetonius as being the best indication of, and historians along with Tacitus, because they wrote during the time that we're looking for. Now, then we have the focus of 50 to 100 CE, and we'll focus on what happens when the first Jewish war occurs in 70 EE. I will give you some hints of what might happen after, but we will focus on the first Jewish war that occurs between 66 and 70 CE. Well, this is part of the 10-part history. As I've listed here, we go from 520 when the Jews returned to 135 CE after the Second Jewish War. These are optional videos for your information. They are just background for your reading in epistles and in the early church fathers. They provide you a sense of what was happening in the Jewish community that, and perhaps the wider area that I've provided you in the introduction to Paul's second missionary journey. Okay, let's begin with the impact on the Thessalonians. The Thessalonians were first spoken to on Paul's secondary missionary journey. The first letter was probably written in 49 CE, and the second letter maybe around 50, a few months after or about the same time. These scholars debate this. And then after that, the Thessalonian church exists from 50 to 476 CE that we can account for. There was a basilica built about that time, and until the Holy Roman Empire fell, this church for Thessalonica stayed fairly intact. It did have a saint who was killed during the persecution of Galerius, the emperor of the Roman Empire, and I show you an icon of Saint Demetrius. Now, Paul's actions after he wrote the II Thessalonian letters was probably the third missionary journey from 52 to 56 AD, and then he was arrested, probably 56 AD, but some people say that there might be some more delay to 58 AD. He had a year's travel to Rome, ending up in either 57 if he started in 56 or 59, and dying about 8 years later. At least that's the allegorical. We can't really be sure. So in that time, these churches may have written other things we don't have concerns on, but this whole event between 50 and 70 AD was crucial to the Jewish portion of the Christian communities and also affected the Gentile portion, because the Jewish war was a fight between the Greek and Gentiles that boiled over across the whole Roman Empire. So the church at Thessalonica would watch the Roman war preparations. It was on the Via Egnatia, which transported soldiers and goods to Syria and goods to Rome from Syria and Alexandria. Jews had family members in the Syrian province, or if there were Gentiles, they might have people who were in the Roman legion, which was hosted in Antioch. Antioch was a clear place where there was the Roman influence, and there was a large Christian community, which was Gentile in some of its population. It also had a strong Jewish community. It was the moderate Jews who would be in Antioch, or who would have been represented by families in Tarsus or the rest, who were lost position in preparation for the first Jewish war in Judea. These moderate Jews often were the Christians that were in the early churches. So let's go into Judea in 52 to 100 CE. What exactly happened? Well, it's the middle of the time the Roman prefects ruled Judea. The Roman prefect rule was initially preferred to King Herod's rule, which in the end became fairly chaotic, with him killing each of his 3 sons. And most of the Roman prefects were adequate. Some were poor, some were good, but only 2 deserve really notoriety. Pontius Pilate was removed because of his poor handling of the Jews. Not only is he infamous for the judgment of Jesus, but he is infamous for other poor handlings of Jews. Gaius Florius was cited as causing the Jewish war because he wanted to hide his greed and his incompetence. So the first Jewish war, Josephus felt, occurred through 6 events in probably 66 and 67, although it may slide to 68, 69, that caused the war, and which made the radical Jews, or the younger Jews, feel there was nothing to lose in a war with Romans. They were going to have a poor life, what was a dead life, what was being dead in comparison. The moderate Jews wished for peace, but Florius ignored because he wanted to push for a war. Jerusalem and Masada were captured during lengthy searches in the First War. After Paul's death, Eusebius, which is the first Christian historian who reads in the time of Constantine, a good 200 later, records a Jewish revolt that occurred both in Syria and perhaps other places. And then there was a second Jewish war reported by Dio Cassius, which may have been caused by building a temple to Jupiter on the site of the Jewish temple, or forbidding circumcisions under the anti-castration laws that Hadrian set up. And Julius Severus fought the Jews under the leadership who were led by Bar Kokhba, which is the son of the star. So what did the prefix look like coming up into this last horrendous prefix? Well, we had Nero becoming Emperor of Rome in 54 AD. At the time he became emperor, Antonius Felix was in the prefect in Judea, and there was a rise of gangs called the Sicarii that were terrorists and robbers. There was an Egyptian prophet who said he would destroy Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, and there were priestly conflicts in Jerusalem. Also, Paul was probably arrested in 50 AD, part of that mix. After that, there is Porcius Festus, who married Drusilla, which was one of the family of the Herodians, of Herod, and the Hermodians dynasties, if Herod can be considered connected to these dynasties. It also begins to have Nero's having a verdict which denies Jews civil rights. This began a empire-wide pushback on Jews and some harassment. Festus died in office. You know that Paul was seen between Festus and Felix. There was some discussion there. But Nero's verdict caused many people in the lands to actually start pushing back or harassing Jews. The gangs overran the land, and he didn't really, he tried to work with them, but you really didn't see him conquer them. There was the stonings of James, the brother of Jesus, and in the end, when Festus dies, there's a break between that and the next prefix, Lucius Albinus. Now, he was a self-seeking, greedy person, and this greed impacted his rule. And he's trying to exterminate the Sicarii, but other people, Cospar and Saul, relatives of Agrippa, may have organized their own gangs because the Jews were becoming more and more worried about their position based on the temple was completed, and it thought that a lot of people might be out of war and that would cause more turmoil, but the foundation gave way and that work continued. Now the Christians began to be persecuted in Rome in 64 CE, so you see there's a lot of turmoil both in the Nero's stirring the pot for the Jews, making sure that there's no security for them, their desperation, and the Christians are beginning to feel the persecution. Now, beyond that, you see, you come down to a prefect who was bent on stripping the populations and ruining whole populations, allowing the brigands to rampant, taking bribes, and doing what he could to incite the Jewish to revolt toward war. So in the end, when that occurs, during these 6 events, Nero sends Vespasian and 4 legions to end it. One of the 2 things that's really tipped it over to full revolt is when the Jewish priesthood became so desperate that they stopped doing temple sacrifices in terms of Rome. And Jerusalem was taken over by a Jewish priest, Eleazar, and a reverence. Perfect Forest ignores the situation, and it gets worse. The Jews take over the city from the Roman garrison. And Agrippa, wanting to calm down the situation and protect his palace and his sister's palace, sent troops to aid the Roman. But the Jewish rebels, Menheim and other Sicarii, aid Eleazar to win. So this is in 66. These smoldering tensions in Jerusalem, because the Jewish rebels won, become open aggressions. The Gentile population, after hearing that the Roman legions were killed, fell on the Jewish population and killed 2,000 in 1 hour's time. That's at least Josephus' view. Whether that's overrun, he would be prejudiced toward the Jews. The Roman troops were recruited from Sebastian's sisters, so these reprisals for the attacks on the Roman troops at Masada, Cyprus, and Jerusalem, where all the garrison was killed, would be normal because this would be brothers, sisters, uncles of the Roman legions. The Transjordan and Jordan towns, the Jews killed the Gentiles, but there was pushback there. And in Ascalon, Hippus, and Gara, the Jews attacked the Gentiles, and also the Gentiles attacked the Jews. In Scythopolis, some Jews felt on the side of Gentiles against the religious, but suspicion led to the slaughter. It was a time in 66 where everything was chaotic. And in the hostilities spread to Alexander, where 2 legions had to put down disturbances in the Jewish quarter. Now, Vespasian is dispatched, and he quickly conquers Galilee and Judea with the 4 legions he's been given, and he conquers Galilean cities, Gaba, Jota, Tiberias, Tachia. Cyprus wasn't conquered. It wanted to be under Roman rule. The Judean cities, Mount Tabor, Joppa, Lydia, Ascus, and Scythopolis, were also conquered. In the middle of it, Nero is deposed, and Vespasian returns to Rome to handle the legions. He leaves the 4 legions in control of his eldest son Titus. He goes back to find that Nero is deposed, and in 1 year, Rome has 4 emperors, Gaba, Ortha, Vitellius, and finally the legions call for Vespasian to rule. And he rules for a good 10 years, and his son rules following him for 2 years. Titus completes the siege of Jerusalem with 4 legions. The 6-month siege is complete with siege walls, and famine was a problem for the Jewish group. The Jewish sacrifices cease after the temple is destroyed, and after that, Titus goes back to Rome, and Flavius Civil captures Masada based on a siege, but there is a suicide of all Jews within the fortress except 2 women and 5 children. It is a horrific time. As you see, the siege walls took tremendous work. There was lumber taken from all of Judea's countryside, and wood was there. The legions, as you see on the right hand, surrounded the legion in the valleys, and any exit from the city in the Kidron Valley or in the others. Other people, some of the moderates, tried to leave via the wall. In the end, Titus collects it, and you see on his victory arch the taking of the Jewish menorah toward Rome, and on his coins it celebrated it, the winning of the war. The Thessalonians would have had to be stunned. They've had Paul's death based on Nero. Nero's allowing attacks on Jews. Then Nero dying. Then the destruction of the Jewish temple. Massive loss of life in Judea. And Jesus Christ hasn't come back yet. There must have been questions all over. All of this, perhaps Paul was sensing might occur, and he provides this in his II Thessalonians in talking about the future. Well, thank you for listening for this first presentation.